Hey, listeners, there's been a lot of debate as of late about whether SDR should roll under sales, whether they should fall under marketing, whether marketing should fall under sales. I don't think that there's a single right answer out there, but Kyle Lacy of Lessonly made a really good point that SDR should fall under the marketing team and not under sales. So I'll let him explain why. Hope you enjoy it.
Welcome to the Kaizen Podcast.
Well, Kyle, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. Topic today that we're going to cover is why SDR should report to marketing and not sales. And before I start challenging you, because I don't agree with that at all, I would love to. I'd love to get a sense for the listeners about your background and why this is a good topic for you to cover.
Yeah, for sure. So I've been in digital marketing for about 14 years. I started a digital agency out of college, and through that led me to a company called ExactTarget, which was at the time, so this is about 2012, largest email marketing platform in the world. Spent over 3 years there, went through an IPO, Salesforce bought us. After that, spent a couple of years at a venture capital firm in Boston called OpenView. And now I lead marketing for a company called Lessonly in Indianapolis, which we provide training software for customer-facing teams, sales and customer service.
Gotcha.
So a lot of my background is marketing, SaaS marketing, software marketing.
Yeah. And so there's definitely different types of companies in the way that they sell, right? Some companies have SDRs for very transactional deals or enterprise or something in between. When you say that SDR should report to marketing, is that for enterprise type SDRs, mid-market SDRs, or would you say all of them?
I believe all of them. Yeah, I think we could, later on, if you want, we could get into where I think it transitions back, and that's in the enterprise realm. But as of right now, I believe for a lot of reasons that SDRs should report into marketing.
Yeah, so pitch me on it. Where does that come from, and what's your belief into why that's more valuable than having them under sales?
I think the spearhead, it's the tip of the spear, right? It's the top of funnel. And I think that if a team is good at what they do, both from a storytelling perspective, a creative marketing perspective, field marketing, and messaging, that it should live in one team, in one focus. There's downsides to that, like should you have a team control 80% of top of funnel, right?
Sure, yeah.
But if it's working, that's a good thing. So that's number one. Number two is that marketing tends to be, at least in my experience, more process focused, project management focused, like campaign focused than sales reps, AEs. And if you're trying to create one spearhead in a battle, right, it's better to be one team and one message. And we've just found that it's just easier to control a lot of the creativity in a good way and control the messaging in a good way if they live under one org.
Yeah, gotcha. This is definitely a tension I found between SDRs and sales and marketing, I should say, in the past, is that, marketing will say, here are all the MQLs we've generated, and sales will say, well, those aren't MQLs in the way that we define them. And so do you feel like that solves because that feels to be one of the biggest tensions between marketing and sales. Do you feel like this solves kind of one of them because the SDRs fall under marketing, so there's a lot more alignment there?
Yeah, and it's easy because we actually don't, on the marketing inbound side, we do not qualify anything but a demo. So if it's an MQL, it's a lead, and that SDR, our inbound SDRs are working that lead because they signed up for a demo request. Everything else is ungated on the website. So you have two qualified opportunities. You have a meeting that an outbound SDR set, which is highly qualified because we do a good job on the targeting side. And then you've got, of course, the demo requests that come in via the website.
Gotcha. And I think, one of the biggest hesitations that, I would hear sales reps make would be, well, I want the SDR on my team so we can, from an account-based marketing perspective, we can work on this account together rather than maybe falling under marketing where you have, inbounds and outbounds, some sort of mix there. Do you feel like those things can be married up from an account-based perspective, or do you think that maybe that is a situation where they should maybe fall under sales?
Yeah, that's like what I referenced earlier. I think that when you move to a one-to-one model where you're starting to do more like podding, for lack of a better term, where you have a CX rep, an AE, and an SDR on an enterprise account, I think that the argument could be made that it lives under a revenue position. But in all reality, good marketing teams should be revenue and brand, right? So I think that what we're discovering is that a lot of what we're doing right now is round robin, which has worked. But as you move into the more deeply focused account planning, that the argument could be made that SDRs that SDR group lives under sales for sure.
Right. And if an SDR were to report to marketing instead of sales, sales will typically compensate on like number of demos or deals closed, et cetera. Do you keep those traditional metrics even though they're under marketing, or do you think of them in totally different ways, like SLAs and things like that?
No, we comp in the same way. We comp in, demo. We do judge performance by demo set as well as activity level through channels, but it's mostly the same comp model.
Gotcha. I don't want to focus so much on like only less and least specifically, but more of like broadly the concept. But I'd love to get a sense of like what percentage do you guys have that would be leads that your SDRs are working that are inbound versus outbound efforts?
It's considerably more inbound.
Gotcha. Okay. So that makes kind of more sense because from an inbound perspective, if you're getting lots of those, you definitely want marketing and SDRs totally aligned because those SLAs are so critical and the messaging needs to be really tight versus like a pure outbound one. You're just giving it.
But just to be clear though, we have an inbound team that only focuses on inbound. So outbound is only focused on outbound. Enterprise tends to work both inbound and outbound, but that's because it's a volume thing.
Yeah, gotcha. And do your junior reps tend to be the folks that are on inbound, or they tend to be the folks that are more on the outbound, or is it some sort of a mix there?
It's a mix in enterprise. The junior reps are inbound on our commercial team. We have 3 inbound reps that work the majority of the inbound deals.
And had you guys started day one with the SDRs under marketing, or has that been an evolution over time?
It's been an evolution. It's August of last year, we moved SDRs under marketing, and that's because we had done a ton of work figuring out the inbound side, and it made sense that our next project should be trying to figure out the outbound model.
So initially you just moved the inbound SDRs under marketing, or did it all fall under marketing right away?
We moved everybody over. When I say inbound, it was more like figuring out the demand gen model that started becoming repeatable.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. And what have been like the pitfalls? Because like every movie may has externalities. I'm interested to hear like what are you seeing as like some of the, maybe not downsides, but the things to be aware of?
Man, our biggest thing has been account targeting. We have gone through, I think there's a lot of pitfalls with using different vendors for account research. Like we've been through 3 vendors to try to figure out who's giving us the right account information, the right contact information, like all these tools that allow you to get phone numbers and addresses and the demographics around a certain account. It's just been really hard for us to find the right tech stack in order to get something that's scalable, that works, that has a low enough error rate that it makes sense. That's probably number 1. Number 2 is marketing. It's taken a lot of work for us to combine the 2 cultures. We have a demand gen team, we have a brand team, and then we have the SDR team. Yeah. So we've spent a lot of time making sure that our goals are starting to align. Everybody's owning the same type of number. The demand gen team owns a certain percentage of the overall leads that need to be generated. So that type of thing is that was my biggest fear when we took the team on, is that we couldn't combine the team cultures.
Right. Because you have SDRs who are kind of priming themselves for a career in sales, and it would feel like a deviation when my boss is ultimately the CMO who's trying to, drive inbound. So how do you guys solve for that? Like, is there still a lot of like mentorship and cross collaboration, I'm guessing, but how do you guys solve for that?
Yeah. So we still have their performance plan or their career plan. So they can choose an AE route, and they just work with the sales enablement team to go through AE enablement. So they're still in the marketing org, but they have a dotted line to the career path from on a sales enablement side.
Yeah, gotcha. And you said you started this thing, I think you said back, was it most recent August or August before, or did I miss your
August before. So it's been a year and a couple months.
Year and a couple months. And how long did you feel like it took before you like felt pretty settled? Like, oh, this is working. We've got kind of processes in. Was it on day 1 or did it take 6 months or last week?
I'd say 3 months, so a quarter. Like we had to rebuild the team. Like we had a lot of turnover. So yeah. You know what? That's probably not fair. Let's say 6.
It's hard. I mean, SDRs in general, it's a very, very tough kind of functional roles to build. I used to manage an SDR team, and I had to grow up from like 7 to 75 in a couple of years. And it was just everything about it is really, really hard. Not only is like finding talent hard, but keeping them. They want to get promoted. People are poaching them internally. It just feels like there are all these forces acting internally, and it just makes it hard to keep the team staffed up.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we've been pretty lucky that we haven't had a lot of churn over the past year and a half. But now, you get to a certain point where you're a year and a half, 2 years in as an SDR, you need to start looking for what's that next thing. Yeah. Because we're very, very focused on, are conscious of that they don't burn out. we
Yeah.
definitely do not want them to burn out.
Yeah, gotcha. So kind of back to the original point around, should SDRs fall under marketing? I've heard an idea being floated, and I'd love to get your perspective that some people are saying that marketing should actually fall under revenue.
Yeah.
And what's your thought on that? Have you seen that take place? What's your perspective?
Oh man, I for it as long as the brand and storytelling portion of the team maintains its validity. And the reason I say that is because we are in a features war across the board for all software companies. I don't care if you're a Marketo or you're just a point solution. What we're finding is, at least from Lessonly as well as other companies that I experience in the OpenView portfolio, the story and the brand is what wins ultimately, right? Like everybody has the same feature set. You can build the same feature set if the story is better. And Drift's a great example of that, right? So I'm afraid that if it moves under revenue, you lose the intangible benefit of building a brand that wins. However, I have seen it work where revenue leaders leave brand alone, and you have like a creative officer, or you have a chief brand officer, or however you want to describe it, where brand just lives in its own org. Communications and brand.
Yeah.
But if you can combine the two, that's when there's true power, in my opinion.
Yeah, because you got everybody pulling in completely the same direction. But your fear is that if it taints the brand enough, then you're not going to be able to differentiate no matter how good at sales you are, because that branding is going to be so critical. Yeah,
and that's where great revenue leaders have a marketing bone and a sales bone. I don't think that's a great analogy. They only have two bones, right?
Yeah.
They have the creativity, the personality type where they can talk to a senior director or brand and they're not sounding like they just want a metric. But then they have the aggressive side, the metrics-oriented side, where they're looking at the demand gen team saying, why is this number down? Or they're looking at the sales team like, why aren't we hitting our pipeline number? But it's a unicorn.
Right. Yeah, it's got to be so hard to find a talented sales leader who is very good at closing deals, tactically good at building a strategy, and also can do branding. That feels like you're paying $1 million a year for that guy or gal.
Yeah, and I think it's different for a company that's product-led, right? Like if it's inbound and you are upselling people within the product and you don't have a big sales or marketing team because you've built this machine, I think that's a completely different model that you see the Typeforms of the world and MailChimps and all these people that are starting to experience this type of growth at scale. Yeah.
So how do you think about in the B2B space, really building a brand that can be impactful from the sales side? Because I came from a company that was very enterprise outbound. Nobody knew who we were. We were trying to sell these $1 million deals, but no one had ever heard of us. So it was the opposite. There was no branding there. It was very much, how can we connect with them, get them to a demo, and then hopefully they close. Maybe we were pretty naive about it, but the idea of being at a company where there are literally any inbounds is a strange concept for me generally. So I'm eager to hear, how do you even start? This is a little deviation about SDRs, but this directly impacts SDRs, especially on your inbound team. So how do you think about, if you and I were starting a company tomorrow and branding was going to be critical, how do you think about even starting to tackle that?
Well, I think there's two questions. Number one is the vision of the company needs to fit the messaging, because you have to be able to believe in what you're bringing to market. From the very beginning, Lessonly's mission statement was, we help people do better work so they can live better lives. You can create any storyline off of that you want, right? Sure. It's very emotional, high emotional intelligence, human elements, right? It works. The second thing is, you've got to be able to, if you're starting from the ground up and you don't have a brand, you've got to debate on whether or not you want to join a category and spend the money on getting into a category. I'm a huge, I could talk for an hour on why I dislike the analyst role, the Gartners and Forresters of the world.
Yeah.
But, the G2s of the world, Trust Radius, this idea of category creation is becoming more scalable, and you've got to figure out where you want to fit. So if you don't have the customer base, Lessonly's lucky enough to where we have 850 customers. So we use that community to further the story, and that's what sells. But if I was starting it from the ground up, it would be, what category do we want to be in? How do we get one or two companies in that category and start building more of a storyline on how we help that category?
Interesting. So you think if you can, is your idea to become a leader in a category that already exists, or to define a new category that doesn't?
I think you got to have a lot of money to define a new category.
I was going to say, the company I was at, we were trying to define a new category, and we got Gartner and Forrester to both accept it. So it became like we had been since day one pushing SEO for this one category, and then the category happened to be, and it just everything flooded in from that point forward.
Yeah,
right?
and that is the perfect scenario. It's the same like the marketing automation story or the ABM story, right?
Yeah.
Like you work with analysts, you create the category, but I'm afraid that we did the same thing at ExactTarget. Like email marketing was a category we helped create. It worked, right? So I'm afraid that world's changing though with G2 and Trust Radius, where the customer is now at the center and it's not the analyst. So a lot of these people that are trying to create a category, I think it will work, but in the long run, if you're talking 2 or 3 years, I think the model's going to break. So for us, like Lessonly, we don't really fit in a necessary category. In any category, right? Sometimes it's corporate LMS, sometimes it's sales engagement, sometimes it's sales enablement, sometimes it's training.
Right.
So we just tell a story that works across all the categories, and we're loud enough to when Gartner's doing a market guide, we're put into it because our customers are talking about it.
And
Does
so
that make sense?
Yeah. So you think really leveraging G2 Crowd, Capterra, whoever's doing these types of, Yelp of B2B stuff, getting your customers to kind of like self-select you and like they're a part of this category, they're part of that category can be more powerful than trying to define a category yourself or try to shoehorn your brand into it. It's
pure selling. Now, I think that changes depending on what enterprise you're going after. Like if it's, which I don't have much experience in, like if it's IT, like CIOs at Fortune 100, you probably need analysts, right?
Yeah.
Like we're selling commercial and moving up market. So I just, from what I've experienced is that because we have so many customers in a certain demographic like sales, when Gartner or Forrester or any of the analyst firms start talking about sales engagement, they have to include us because we have a voice in that market, even if we have a relationship with them or not.
Yeah, it's hearing you talk about this seems very intuitive, but it seems like it's so far from, I mean, my background is in sales and operations. That skill set seems so different. Like when you're talking about finding a sales leader who knows this whole concept just seems like it's impossible to find, mostly because like I don't know anyone well in the sales marketing space who could even do this in addition to what they're already doing. It just feels like it's so rare to find someone who will have that mentality.
Yeah, well, smart CROs hire really, really good brand VPs of marketing.
Okay.
Like I think that you can figure it out with like your starting 5, right?
Yeah.
But it's definitely not an easy thing to overcome for sure for a chief revenue officer because they're usually more sales oriented.
Yeah, so I want to kind of take a step back and talk through some of that branding piece because again, I don't know anything about it, so I want to spend some time to understand it better. And you talked about how this is like kind of the culture of the company and also pervades your sales and product and customer success. So like how do you get from we've got an idea that this could kind of be our branding or our messaging to we're going to actually spread it across everything that we do in the business and to all of our customers and throughout the internet? Like how does that even become, like how do you even start that?
That's a great question. Well, number one, you have to take risks. Like you have to be okay with failing. Number two is that you're going to get a little lucky. Like our mission statement was, we help people do better work so they can live better lives. Our CEO was writing a book and one of our contacts randomly said, you should call it Do Better Work. And then we developed a Do Better Work method. And then we developed a Do Better Work maturity model for services.
Yeah.
And now our front page says Do Better Work on our website. So we kind of fell into that type of messaging and that branding.
Yeah.
But it's got to start at the founders. Like the idea of the values and the vision and the mission of the company has to start with those first 2 people and it has to be able to scale. And I think that's the only reason it's worked here. But it's really hard to maintain that level of culture and branding because you have to start internally.
Yeah.
If your team, if it's just marketing saying, here's the message, here's the brand, we think you need to talk about it, and the internal team is not bought in, it will fail.
Yep.
And that's when campaigns fail because sales is talking about something completely different than what marketing thinks somebody should talk about. But when it's a core to the business, it's much easier to enable the entire company on how to talk about it because we already are.
Yeah, it feels like it's got to be something that starts, you're saying with the founders, I totally agree, but it's almost like before you hire another person, the founders need to be aligned that this is the culture we're going to build. It's like you almost need to get lucky and make the right choice very, very early on because we went through a branding exercise at a company I used to work at and they had all the sales reps come up with our mission statement, like just do it for Nike or whatever it was for us. And they were okay, but the marketing team rolled out, this is our new mission statement, but nobody was bought into it. And so it kind of falls flat. And I can imagine where sales reps are going through the deck, like kind of half-assing that slide, just kind of not really putting their effort into it, versus if this is what you're hired for, that's a whole different perspective on it.
Well, and it goes back to what we were talking about before with SDRs. I believe that moving SDRs under marketing forced alignment between sales and marketing. So a great example of that is you and I kind of talked about this before, but we give a golden llama out to an employee every quarter, somebody that exhibits the values of the company. We mass produced little golden llamas that we use in direct mail. Basically, we send it to somebody and the card says, hey, give this to an employee that exhibits the values of your company, and it has nothing to do with Lessonly. And it is our best performing direct mail piece. But if marketing had been separate from sales and we didn't have that culture aspect of the golden llama and the llama within Lessonly, that would have never happened. So what we have happening is that a branding piece that has nothing to do with our platform is performing better than anything that has to do with our feature set.
Because
when it comes to like setting meetings.
Because you're so consistent across the board of like, we live this, we talk about it, we swag is this way, our conferences are this way, everything is tied into this whole culture. There's no like deviation or cracks in that.
Absolutely. And everybody celebrates the golden llama internally. So it's very, very easy for the sales rep to be passionate about the golden llama when they send it out, even though it's a 3-inch spray painted one, and I've done about 1,000 of them. Yeah.
I can imagine when you're interviewing people, this has got to be something that's part of the interview process, that this is part of our culture. And you feel like finding people who are bought into it or not bought into it is pretty easy to do? Or will people just say, oh, I love that concept, but they don't actually care? I could imagine you bring people in who are just not really bought into the vision, just kind of going through the motions, and they can actually be a major drag, not neutral, but actually a drag on you because they're either neutral or negative about it.
Yeah, I think that we have a pretty good interview process in order to vet that. One thing that I do on the marketing side is that whatever hiring committees put in place to get this person, everybody has to be unanimous on whether they want to hire them or not. Now, if I'm hiring 70 people like you did over 2 years, I'm not sure that a hiring committee being unanimous helps that, right?
Yeah.
But if I'm hiring 2 or 3 SDRs a quarter, that's fairly easy to have that. Or even the marketing team, like everybody has to give a thumbs up. And that way, the people who have already bought into the culture understand that we are judging on the values of the company. And we, walking into an interview, we also give questions that have to do with each value statement. And then they report on it. Like, share before you're ready is one of our values. We make sure that one person in the interview process is asking about something around, when did you share before ready? Are you comfortable with that?
Is this, I mean, you mentioned that the founders are the ones who really set this initial vision and mission, but like it's got to be like everybody maintaining it. But do you have like a dedicated person who's just like culture, and internally they're finding ways for like, how can we inject our culture? Not inject is the right term, but how can we ensure that our culture is always represented in essentially everything that we do? Because I could imagine, hey, I'm going to host a lunch for new SDRs, but I don't ever talk about some of our values there. Like, we want to make sure that we're proactively focusing on our culture versus like hoping that people continue to encourage it.
We don't have a specific person. I mean, we have a talent team that talks about culture. Our brand team talks about culture constantly. I think like we're about 150 employees. So we're mostly all in one building. We only have like 5 or 6 remote people. So it's still maintainable. I think that 2 years from now, I might have a completely different answer to that. But we have somebody that focuses on like employee events and stuff, our operations manager, like office operations, but not a specific person that's culture. Kind of lives in everyone.
And it's got to, right? Because it can't just be only the executives and it's got to be literally everyone throughout the organization. It's got to be bought in, or it's not going to work at all.
And that's why I mean, I know we're not talking about career advice here, but for people like looking for software companies, that's like jobs at SaaS. That's what you need to look for. Like, if you walk into a company and there's 50 people and they're all maintaining the same type of culture, you've got a special thing going. If the platform's a POS, like, then you've got a problem. But if you have a decent software platform and you have a culture that everybody's kind of supporting, you've got something that not a lot of people have.
It's funny because I never thought of this, but I used to be in the military, and I was in a unit called the Rangers, and there's this concept called the Ranger Creed. There's like 6 stanzas to it. To be a Ranger, you have to like write it 100 times and say it over and over, memorize it. It's very much like pervasive throughout the culture. And like, if you see someone not upholding the standards of the Ranger Creed, you call them out on it, they'll get booted out. Like, there's lots of situations where that happens. And I never associated that with business. I always thought of it as, oh, it's kind of like a team building activity, but I never thought of having some sort of a cohesive stanza, creed, culture, whatever you want to call it, that everybody's bought into. Because like, to be in the Rangers is such a hard thing to do that you kind of have to already be bought into that, where, you know, there's so many SaaS companies like you're saying that exist. You can get a job anywhere, but getting one with a good culture is so hard to find. You should lock onto that.
Well, and I saw, you know, Exact Target, we had what was called orange culture, and we were onboarding 40 people a week.
Wow.
It maintained itself. That is special. Like Lessonly, we're hiring a lot of people, but we're not huge, right? So it's still maintainable. But when you're doing I think Zendesk is a great example of that. I think Salesforce is a great example. Exact Target, Exact Target's now the Marketing Cloud, but it's a very special thing if you can find that. And it starts from the beginning. And if it can scale from 5 people to 50, you've got something special.
Yeah, I've definitely heard the same about Zendesk. I've heard LinkedIn, my wife used to work there, is that it's a great culture in the same way they really support. And I think a lot of folks, especially maybe younger in their career, confuse or conflate culture with stuff. Like we have all these things that mean we're a cool, good culture, but that's different than we have a mission statement that everybody follows.
Yeah, and I think you could have as many ping pong tables and LaCroix as you want, but if your leadership team is not high on emotional intelligence and understands the idea of managing humans and being vulnerable and the ideas of emotional intelligence, then it's not going to be a culture that you're going to enjoy. I think in high growth software, that's harder to come by because it's all about, it's all about performance, and, you don't allow for people to make mistakes. And that's why senior level marketing and salespeople in venture-backed software companies last about 13 months on average.
Sure. Yeah.
I think it's complete bullshit.
Yeah.
Because you don't give anybody the ability to try to create their own identity within a culture. If they miss their first quarter, they're gone.
Yeah.
You'll never. Now there'll be some companies that can do that will win.
Sure.
But nobody's going to be happy.
Yeah. Yeah.
They'll make money, but ultimately, it's just life's too short.
Yeah, to feel like I'm an employee who's just a cog in a wheel for a short period of time that'll be churned out doesn't create loyalty, doesn't tie me to the brand in a positive way. It's just I need to get as much out of this as I can, as many LaCroix as I can, so I can get out of here with ping pong experience. So I think that's definitely mine, right?
Really good ping pong player, but
better than anybody, because I know that. But when you're looking to hire SDRs or even mid-level managers or executives that want to be bought into the culture, you mentioned EQ is something that's really important. How do you vet that out? What do you look for because people will confirm that I buy into this culture, but there's a difference between really being bought into it. And so how do you suss that out?
So on the marketing side, and we do this a lot, we use predictive index, for personality profiling. Now that your personality test does not get you the job or makes you lose the job, right? It's just a way for us to look at how you would fit in the team, because then you can map it with the entire team's PI. And then for the marketing side, we bring everybody in, and then after they talk to the entire team, they'll do a presentation. That gives us a lot of information on whether or not they would fit based off of how much time they spent, what they added into the presentation.
Yeah.
And that's after the presentation is when we give a thumbs up across the whole team. But really, it's the questions around the values, like how are we framing those questions and what the answers were. And then we look at the PI, of course. It's like, how does your personality profile fit in the team dynamic? And how does it fit with the role that we're hiring for and stuff like that? Like everybody does, right? I mean, it's a common thing to look at that, but everybody takes a PI before they're interviewed. Yeah,
I'm starting to see that more and more from folks in my network mentioning that they're seeing these more at companies that they're trying to work for. I think from the interviewing side of things, like I'm trying to get a job, it feels like it's a hurdle. There's lack of clarity to what the impact of this is. It feels like I'm taking a test and I'm worried I might fail, versus they're using this to figure out where I'll fit best on the team. It feels like that tends to not be communicated as well. But what has been the impact of that across? I don't know if it's something you can even measure well, is we're doing these assessments and now we're finding that this has been improved because of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple ways. I think it's churn on a team.
Okay.
If you got high churn on a team, then the PI thing's not working, right? Yeah. And then we do quarterly employee surveys. And if we start seeing things drop or satisfaction is dropping, you can relate that to your hiring. mentality, right? It's not necessarily related to PI, but PI is one component of it. So that's, I mean, for Lessonly, that's how we look at it are we seeing a drop in employee survey satisfaction? Like, does the PI fit in the model, in the team model? And those are just two components of a very large system that we have.
Yeah. And you've got enough scale with north of 100 employees doing one of these once a month or every quarter. That's actually quite a few data points to start giving you significant real information rather than just anecdotes about how people are feeling in a given.
Yeah. And it's very important that you combine all of those anecdotes into one decision, right? It's not just the PI. It's not just the in-person interview. It's not just the phone screen that you did with the talent team. It's everything combined together to make a decision. And I think we do it fairly well, and we haven't cultures scaled with us, which is a positive.
Yeah. So how do you, one of the things I used to do because I couldn't keep up with interviewing, we had too many people. I had this idea for interviewing SDRs that I would take experienced people and junior people, kind of like the concept of you take an old sheepdog and a puppy and you tie their collars together and the new one just kind of learns how the older one works. That's just how you teach them. And so we'd always do panel interviews because I found that new people who were interviewing would have a very different experience than a very senior person interviewing. So I'd have like 2 senior people and 2 new people, and they would all do a panel interview together, which would be intense for the person being interviewed, but the new people could watch what the older folks had asked and kind of learn and see kind of the same thing. So it was actually really effective to do that. But one of the things that we found is that from a culture standpoint, we just tended to hire people that were just like us, right? Because people, that was a fear, is that it diminished our diversity because everyone was looking for us, and people are going to be aligned with people that look and sound just like them. So how do you keep that mixed up with this concept of really maintaining the culture?
Oh man, so we have a lot of things. Like it has to do with the greenhouse application process where we've removed some things that have to do with diversity, right? So that we're not making this. It's not like unconscious bias. We have a diversity and inclusion committee that spends a lot of time talking about how can we be more diverse? How can we hire? We have different committees that go out and say, hey, you're networking in these groups, but there's these other groups that I think we should get involved in. And we're definitely not perfect. I think that we have a long ways to go, but it's as simple as we had a conversation a couple of weeks ago with the committee saying, we should change our career page to be more accommodating. Right? So it's a lot of things. And I think it's just what the committee has done, which I highly recommend for any company, is that it's kept it front of mind for everyone. Like once a month, they'll have let's go in the lunch area and watch a TED Talk on unconscious bias.
Sure.
Or here's an event that half of us, that 5 or 6 of us are going to, and we think other people should come.
Yeah.
And it's built in the culture.
Yeah. And it's funny because I'm sure employees can sense of when they literally check the block by technically doing the things that they say they need to do to increase diversity versus they're actually trying to walk the walk as much as possible. Like we're clearly doing the things we should be doing. And I think employees can suss that out right away. And that's going to either drive a good culture or reinforce a bad one. For sure.
And it's been a long process for us. And I think it's very much dependent on where you're located. There's a lot of factors that go into how you focus on diversity and inclusion. So I think we've done a pretty good job at it, but there's always room to grow for sure.
Yeah. And it's it's more perfect, right? Every day you're trying to make it better. It's never going to be done.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And if you're trying to be around for 10 or 20 or 30 years as a business, you need to set this up on day one. It's so fundamental to where you want to be in 20 years. But if you're 20 years in, you're just not going to right that ship. It feels like that's insurmountable at that point.
Right.
Back to kind of the SDR piece, because that's ultimately what we started talking about. I'd love to get a sense of how much, with marketing being owning the SDR piece and kind of sales there, how much is marketing owning the messaging for SDRs versus sales really influencing that? Because I think there can be some tension to how messaging, works depending on the lens people look through impacts how they write things. And so how do you guys marry those types of things up between the two teams?
Well, this is one of the lessons learned, which you had asked about before that I didn't bring up, was we, in the first phase of them moving over, marketing wrote a lot of the cadences. And since then, we haven't touched them because we allowed the SDRs to be as human as possible. When they were reading cadences that we wrote, it sounded terrible. Yeah. Right? It was like, we're the top training software in the world and blah, blah, blah. And nobody talks like that. Right. So we've the copy, the content side of the house is backed off. Now we still help with nurture emails and stuff like that, but it's really about spending time on personalization, understanding who the contact is, and then getting them on the hook to talk about what their problems are. And it's not using marketing speak on how great we are.
Yeah.
And I think that's the difference, right?
Yep. Your skill set to write a killer white paper is very different than crafting an effective email.
So we tried it once. And then I think also what I'd throw in there on why SDR should report to marketing. Marketing is a good marketing team is focused on continuous rapid improvement. A lot of that has to do with click rate optimization tests that they're running all the time, like testing campaigns. I don't think that comes naturally to salespeople. So when we're running 5 or 6 CRO tests in a month, it's really easy for us to shift pretty quickly on, well, shit, that didn't work. We need to change everything and just move towards a model that works for you. And we could do that pretty quickly. And I think that's why it's worked so well, is that I'm okay with saying, all right, that was a terrible idea. That failed. Let's move on.
Yeah. Because especially when you've got volume like you guys have in terms of inbounds, you've got like thinking about Drift, the amount of traffic they get to their website must be insurmountable relative to my website. And so that lends that marketers have the ability to do real A/B testing or A/B multivariate testing, right? It's very easy to do those things. But as a sales rep, especially if you're doing account-based or enterprise stuff, you might only have a few shots. And so people get very locked onto anecdotes and they become almost gimmicky where I had success with this random email. I'm going to use it all the time when there's no real data to back that up. So that feels like an advantage for marketers to be very prescriptive about being data-driven rather than just anecdote-driven.
Yeah, and I'm going to say this without thinking about it, which is probably not good, but a lot of people talk about the science behind sales, right? Yeah. And the SDR process is very science oriented, but there's a creative science to it. It's like we have a board game that we produce in house. Like that board game might work for one account, and a golden llama might work for another, or a alma mater coffee mug might work for the third one, right? Yeah. And you've got to train people to think like that. Because salespeople are trained to be process oriented. Yes. And marketing is also process oriented, but we change so quickly that it's more of a creative process. So I think that's why it fits pretty well until you move into the one-on-one model where it's account planning and everything we talked about before.
Yeah, that's resonating with me a bit because I was initially pretty hesitant about the idea of sales or SDRs rolling up into marketing, but the idea of using that concept of this creativity and being dynamic and also being data driven, where sales tends to be like I wing it or I've got a ton of experience.
No, I mean the only reason it works is alignment. Like we have anybody that's thinking of doing this, or actually anyone that's in marketing sales, you should have one hour meeting a week that's operations, sales, marketing, and CX leaders in the room talking about the funnel and pipeline. Because if you have alignment, it really doesn't matter where they live, right? It's just that you are all going towards the same goal. And if you are communicating effectively and you have alignment on what objectives you have quarterly, then who cares who they report to? Right. It's just a matter of reaching that goal. Yep. And we had to spend a little bit, not a lot of time, but we had to spend a little bit of time building that alignment. And it was forced even quicker when 80% of top of funnel came through marketing. Yeah, I like that because there's your concept around culture kind of solves a point that I'm about to make, which is a thing that I brought up a lot from the military that applies a lot of times is commander's intent. Because like as a SDR, you oftentimes have to make a decision about how I'm going to respond to a person, but I can't go ask my boss's boss's boss how I should respond to it. I have to take the culture that I've been taught, and I have to apply it in the situation. So the commander, whoever the leader is internally, should be implying how you should broadly be solving these problems or broadly be communicating with customers. So you have this alignment and then trust that your people are going to execute on it and make it happen based on that intent that you've given them. Because you can't tell them you always write this message, you always write this way, you always send them a mug, because it doesn't work that way. Sure. And so the way to think about this is how we frame it with our customers and internally. There's two components of a high performing team. There's relational excellence and operational excellence. The relational excellence is the emotional intelligence. Yeah. It's the vulnerability, it's being human. The operational is the process and how you get to where you want to go. Yeah. If you could figure out how to meld those two together, which I think, I was never in the military, so I can't speak to it, but I read a lot about the military, right? Yeah. I think they've done that pretty well, right? So that's how we view it, is that you have to have both. And if your culture's a POS, but you have great operational excellence,
Yeah.
you might make it, but probably you're going to churn a ton of people and you're going to fold. And that's the reality, is that you got to have a balance of both.
It feels like being a call center, right? If you have great operational but no emotional, like you're clearly just a call center, and the other way around.
That's why we serve call centers.
Right.
You've got to. People have to enjoy what they do on a daily basis. They're going to churn at a high rate. So and then they're going to go home and they're going to be unhappy with their kids because they just had a crappy day at work.
Yeah.
So it's about balancing both to have a high performing team.
Yeah, I love it. I think that's a good spot to end it. I think that's like really the summary of this whole conversation is help people out, give them a good job, give them something to work towards and a good culture. I think they're going to do good stuff for you.
Absolutely. I really appreciate you having me.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Kyle.